He came to bulldoze our quiet lives for a fat paycheck, but he never realized we were holding the deed to his soul. It started with a glossy pamphlet and a smug smile, but what followed was a war waged over beige paint. The first time I saw him, Arthur Penhaligon, it was standing right in the middle of the cul-de-sac, the one where Mrs. Gable's prize-winning hydrangeas always looked a little too vibrant, and where the little kids, the ones with the relentless energy, used to chase stray tennis balls until dusk. He wasn't just in the neighborhood. He was an imposition, like a poorly parked delivery van that refuses to move, or a persistent, high-pitched whine that drills into the back of your skull. He had the kind of tailored jacket that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, and a smile that looked professionally engineered, bright, confident, and utterly devoid of warmth. He was pitching. "Look around you," he'd said, gesturing grandly with a hand that probably moisturized daily. "Look at the potential. This isn't just a collection of charming, aging bungalows nestled in a quiet pocket of suburbia. This, my friends, is untapped real estate gold, a demographic goldmine waiting for the right catalyst." The catalyst, of course, was him. Arthur Penhaligon, the titan of the Penhaligon Property Group, a man who treated the concept of community like a quaint, slightly inefficient historical footnote. We, the residents of Sycamore Lane, were not thrilled. We were not even mildly impressed. We were deeply, fundamentally wary. We were people who cherished the uneven pavement, the slightly leaning mailbox, the way the scent of freshly cut grass mixed with the faint, underlying aroma of Mrs. Gable's overly sweet lemon scones. We liked things the way they were, and Arthur was here to suggest that the way they are was somehow insufficient, somehow pedestrian. He started with the pamphlets, glossy, heavy, offensively colored pamphlets that smelled faintly of expensive printer ink and ambition. They showed our modest homes, our humble havens, as sleek, modern showcases. He didn't see bungalows. He saw charming, single-family residences with apparent potential for vertical expansion. He didn't see our history. He saw marketable heritage assets. Then came the meetings. They weren't polite chats over the fence. They were organized assemblies, held in the community hall, a room usually reserved for the annual bake-off and the neighborhood watch briefings about suspicious lawn gnomes. Arthur stood at the podium, bathed in the harsh glow of the fluorescent lights, and began the sermon. "Sycamore Lane," he'd boom, his voice amplified to a pitch that made my feelings vibrate, "is currently undervalued. We are leaving capital on the table. Think of the potential for modernizing the infrastructure, for introducing boutique retail fronts, for transforming this idyllic enclave into a true, high-yield residential hub." High yield. Well, we were yielding our peace, our established routines, our quiet dignity for his high-yield nonsense. The escalation was subtle at first, a slow, creeping tide of irritation. He'd corner you at the mailbox. "Lovely shade of beige on your exterior, by the way. Very safe, very reliable." When you tried to defend the beige, suggesting it was a testament to sensible taste, he'd simply pat his chest pocket, a gesture of smug proprietorship. "Reliable is fine, Harold, but exceptional. Exceptional requires a vision, and frankly, Sycamore Lane needs mine." Then came the pressure. He started targeting the weaker links. Old Mr. Henderson, whose wife, bless her stubborn heart, refused to believe that a condo conversion was a threat to her cherished garden. Arthur didn't argue. He simply presented data, charts, graphs, projections, a dazzling, terrifying blizzard of financial certainty designed to overwhelm human stubbornness. "Mr. Henderson," he'd purr, leaning over his pristine mahogany desk, "your home is currently appreciating at a modest 3.1% annually. My projection, factoring in the new lifestyle amenities we propose, places it at a conservative 8.5% within 3 years. You are voluntarily choosing mediocrity." Mediocrity. The word felt like a slap across the face. We weren't mediocre. We were perfectly, stubbornly, delightfully ordinary. And in this neighborhood, ordinary was a badge of honor. My own resistance was fierce. I worked remotely, mostly from my sunroom, and I was privy to the daily skirmishes. Arthur would stop by, ostensibly to discuss curb appeal enhancements, but really just to gauge the temperature of the room. If the temperature was cool, he'd deploy the future vision rhetoric. If it was lukewarm, he'd bring up property tax assessments. If it was downright frosty, he'd simply smile that infuriating, perfect smile and say, perhaps a small, strategic incentive. Then, the incentives were always thinly veiled bribes, a free landscaping consultation which always turned into an aggressive suggestion to rip out the perennials, a discounted appraisal which always highlighted the structural weaknesses that needed his touch, a promise of a prime spot in the new hypothetical community pool, a pool we didn't even know existed until he mentioned it. The tipping point came on a Tuesday, during the neighborhood association meeting. It was supposed to be a discussion about the shared sprinkler system maintenance schedule. Instead, it devolved into a full-blown defense of our right to beige paint. Arthur, standing by the projector, had just displayed a rendering of Sycamore Lane, towering, glass-fronted structures replacing the cozy bungalows, complete with a soaring, aggressively modern entrance archway that looked like it belonged in a corporate headquarters, not a quiet suburban street. "Gentlemen, ladies," he announced, his voice losing a fraction of its polished smoothness and gaining a sharp edge of impatience. "This is not a negotiation. This is a necessary evolution. We are offering a comprehensive buyout package. Cash offers, staggered, starting at a respectable $500,000 per residence, contingent on minor cosmetic updates. Take the money, accept the future, or cling to the past and watch it stagnate." Stagnate. The word hit me like a physical blow. It felt like a judgment. It felt like a dismissal of every shared memory, every quiet Sunday afternoon, every slightly crooked fence post that gave our street its unique character. He wasn't offering an upgrade, he was demanding a surrender. He wanted us to admit that our way of life was flawed, that our taste was pedestrian, that our quiet contentment was merely an underdeveloped commodity waiting for his predatory genius to polish it into something profitable. The silence that followed his pronouncement was heavy, thick with collective outrage. Mrs. Gable looked ready to launch a verbal hydrangeas attack. Harold gripped his mug so tightly his knuckles were white. And then, I spoke. My voice, usually soft, conversational, was surprisingly steady. "And what about the soul of this place, Arthur?" He paused, the engineered smile flickering, surprised by the directness. "It's all a romantic concept, dear. Very charming, but ultimately non-quantifiable." "But it's quantifiable," I countered, stepping up to the microphone, feeling a surge of heat rising in my chest that felt suspiciously like pure, unadulterated fury. "It's in the way the light hits the oak tree on Elm Street at 5 o'clock. It's in the way we wave to each other even when we're rushing to the car. It's in the fact that our beige paint doesn't try to be exciting. It just is. And that just being is worth more than $500,000, Arthur. Because it's ours." He tried to pivot, to regain control, to deploy the data-driven deflection. "But you can't live on sentiment, madam. You live on market value. And my market value is high." "Well," I said, taking a deliberate, slow step closer to the podium, meeting his gaze head-on, "perhaps you need to learn that sometimes the highest market value is in the intangible." The following weeks became a war of attrition. We mobilized. We formed a small, unofficial resistance committee, a collective of stubbornly principled homeowners. We countered his glossy pamphlets with hand-drawn sketches showing the actual beauty of our street. We challenged his projections by showing him the local school district's consistent top ratings. We flooded his office with letters, each one articulating a small, specific piece of what he was trying to erase. He fought back with relentless, polished aggression. He offered $550,000. He suggested a joint venture where we'd co-brand our historical charm with his modern flair. He implied that if we didn't sell, he'd be forced to buy the entire block piecemeal, and then, inevitably, he would raise the prices so high that even we would be forced to sell to his own portfolio. The injustice was a constant, throbbing ache in my ribs. It wasn't just the money. It was the arrogance. It was the presumption that because he possessed a degree in finance and a taste for bespoke Italian loafers, he possessed the inherent right to dictate the aesthetic and economic fate of our shared existence. He viewed us as quaint, slow-moving livestock waiting for him to herd toward the slaughterhouse of profit. The final meeting was set for the end of the month. This was it. The final, decisive push. He had upped his offer to $625,000 contingent on us agreeing to a community architectural review board run solely by him, which essentially meant he'd have veto power over garden gnomes. He walked in that day radiating triumph. The jacket seemed shinier, the smile wider, the posture more aggressively assured. He didn't need to say much. The sheer force of his victory was palpable. "Well, Sycamore Lane," he began, leaning against the door frame, surveying the gathered residents with a proprietary air. "It seems the sentimental attachment has finally yielded to fiscal responsibility. A wise choice. I commend you. The Penhaligon Group is ready to make your lives exceptional." He was about to deliver the closing line, the triumphant pronouncement that would seal our fate, when I raised my hand, silencing the polite murmur of agreement. "Arthur," I said, and this time my voice wasn't just steady, it was layered with years of suppressed indignation. "Before you declare victory, there is one small detail you seem to have overlooked." He stopped, the practiced gesture of the triumphant salesman freezing midair. "And what might that be, madam? A delightful patch of petunias resisting modernization?" "No," I said, shaking my head slowly. "Something much more fundamental to your entire operation, your entire premise." He looked genuinely confused, a rare crack in the flawless veneer. "My premise? That Sycamore Lane is an undervalued asset ripe for high-yield redevelopment?" "Yes," I confirmed. "But you assumed that we were the only fixed variable. You assumed that the charm, the history, the beige, that all of it was simply a beautiful static backdrop against which your gleaming new towers would shine." I paused, letting the silence swell, allowing the weight of the unspoken accusation to settle. "But Arthur, you didn't just try to buy our neighborhood. You tried to buy the narrative of our neighborhood. You tried to replace our story with a balanced sheet." Then I leaned in, dropping my voice just enough so that the audience had to strain to catch the next words, forcing them into the moment with me. "And we, Arthur, we decided to buy you." The effect was immediate. The light seemed to catch the expensive sheen of his jacket in a sudden, unforgiving way. His confident posture wavered. The smile didn't just falter, it seemed to stutter, like a faulty piece of high-end machinery. "Boss?" he managed, the word thin and reedy. "Exactly," I said, finally allowing a slow, deep, utterly satisfied smirk to spread across my face. "We didn't just agree to your buyout offer. We negotiated a partnership. We bought Penhaligon Property Group." A gasp swept through the room, followed by a cacophony of stunned murmurs. He stammered, running a manicured hand over his perfectly styled hair. "But that's impossible. The valuations, the portfolio depth. We hired the best valuation experts," I interrupted smoothly, "and we countered your offer with a controlling stake. We didn't just take your money, we took your control. We took the narrative. The true vengeance wasn't the money, though that was substantial. A staggering sum that meant Mrs. Gable could finally afford professional hydrangeas that didn't look suspiciously vibrant. The true vengeance was the subversion. The deal stipulates," I continued, letting the details cascade over him like a beautifully tailored, inescapable net, "that Arthur Penhaligon and the entire Penhaligon Group will now operate under the banner of Sycamore Lane Properties. Your flagship agency will no longer be merely Penhaligon. It will be Sycamore Lane Properties, driven by Penhaligon expertise." He stared at me, his eyes wide, the polished confidence finally cracking to reveal the frantic, terrified businessman beneath. He wasn't angry yet. He was calculating. He was trying to figure out how to claw his way back, how to reassert dominance. "The branding," he choked out. "The legacy. The name recognition." "The legacy," I corrected him gently, "will be one of endurance. The recognition will be of quality. And as for your expertise," I let the final blow land, savoring the sight of his jaw tightening, "that will now be channeled entirely toward making our quiet, sensible, beautifully Bay Street the most aggressively valuable, most undeniably desirable address in the entire county. You won't be selling the future, Arthur. You'll be perfecting our present." He looked at the faces around the room, faces that had been wary, then skeptical, and finally, triumphant. He looked at the community hall, the room that had served as the battleground, and saw not a quaint venue, but a fortress. He looked at me, and for the first time, that engineered smile didn't flicker. It collapsed entirely, replaced by a look of stunned, grudging respect. "The Community Architectural Review Board," he whispered, testing the words. "It's mine, right?" "It is," I confirmed, nodding slowly. "But the final vote, the one that determines whether your boutique retail front is a quaint little artisan cheese shop or a hideous, monolithic chain coffee emporium, that vote, Arthur, rests with the people who actually live here. And frankly," I added, leaning in one last time, the victory ringing clear in the air, "we have a very strong collective opinion about the cheese shop."